to the Debrief with Rob and Sam, a bi-weekly Formula One show breaking down the latest F1 race, giving you a full debrief of our thoughts from the race and more. My name's Rob, he's Sam, and do we have a lot to talk about from the Saudi Arabian Grand Prix?
Oh, yes, we do, my friend Rob. And let's start with, race recap. Max Verstappen from P15 to P2. Sergio Perez with a dominant win from pole position right to the end. Luckily, this time he did not get screwed over by the safety car, so that was a good benefit for him, because I know last year that was a huge issue where he lost the race win in that issue of the safety car, but luckily he waited to pit until after the safety car. I guess, he didn't pit before the safety car this year as well. Not a ton of other action really happening post the safety car. It seems like there was a little battle in between the midfield. Mostly, really, the biggest battle between Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris, honestly, going at it for like P15. But other than that, there wasn't really much. So any other thoughts really for the race recap?
Not really. It's like you mentioned, it was pretty straightforward. After that safety car, kind of tuned down. But speaking of, prior to the safety car, do you have a driver of the day that stood out to you?
Yes, I do. Max Verstappen from P15 to P2. I mentioned it earlier as well. I think just the ability, the fact that he made it. I mean, knowing Jeddah, knowing the circuit that it is, it's not really a circuit that you can't, like, people say you can't really overtake. Lando Norris said post race you can't, like, he struggled to overtake. Clearly Max did not. Like, he was up into P13 within a couple laps, and I think he was in the top 10. I think after, like, it was like lap 10 or lap 8 or something like that. Within the first 8 to 10 laps, he was already into the points position. It was a nice lap 14 overtake on Ocon. The safety car like timed it really perfectly for his climb in terms of his help of his race, because he was up into P4 and then that's when the safety car hit. Now, I'm not saying, like, he was getting close to George Russell even without the safety car, but I think that safety car really played into the hands of the race restart of getting closer to George. And it was just crazy, because watching him and watching that Red Bull specifically, like, zone in and get closer and closer on every car that he passed without even DRS, and the need of DRS was just like, it went from like here to like here within a couple of corners. And it was like, and then with DRS, he was just like, he zoomed past Lewis Hamilton. He zoomed past George Russell. He zoomed past everyone. And I think the comment that David Crofty made was, that looked like Formula One and F2, and he said it's not, and it sounds like a huge diss to Mercedes, but that's not like an insult to the team that developed the Mercedes car. That's just a like, Red Bull designed this super fast car. Adrian Newey once again did it again. And he designed an amazing car with the Red Bull, the amazing team at Red Bull, and it's a pure rocket ship. Like, there is a rocket fuel in that car, and we saw it with Perez as well. Like, the fact that he dominated the race from start to finish, and no one came close to it. Not even Max was able to really push up to him. Like, he kind of was still 5 seconds back, which was, great to see, because that made the championship close. And I'm glad they didn't like have Checo like slow him down or anything. But that's my driver of the day, is Max Verstappen. What about you?
Yeah, I'm going to join you on that one. I know we were talking about it a little bit earlier. Yeah. I was trying to like piece and pull something together just because I find it so easy to pick Max week in, week out. But, he it's like you mentioned, he did deserve it, starting from P15, getting down into the podium. Also setting the fastest lap on the last lap of the race to secure that extra point. I think that's something that needs to be noted as well. Yep. I'll tell you who wasn't my driver of the day, Jos Verstappen, for unintentionally getting caught in that Checo Perez celebration. I don't know if you saw that.
That was so funny. He did not look happy to be. He is the most unhappy man on the planet. Like, the difference between Checo's dad, whenever either if Max or Checo wins or if Red Bull wins, he is like so happy with himself. Jos, like, I think he is given the mentality, the fact that he raised his son to be a winner and cold stone emotion. Max very rarely shows emotion, even during the race as well. We saw him get a little upset about the radio, like at his engineer. That's the most emotion we'll ever see out of Max, probably. Like, it's just how he was raised. That's what I'm saying. Like, it's the difference in how Sergio Perez was raised in his family versus how Max Verstappen was raised, and the difference is there. And I mean, Max Verstappen, yeah, he's he's a winner for a reason. That is, like, there's a reason why he's a 2-time world champion, because he has that mentality, that killer instinct. And I think Perez is starting to get that for sure. And it's interesting. And it's great to see Perez up there for sure. I think that's great to
Yeah.
see because I want to see a close battle between the two Red Bulls. And I think the only championship battle we're going to see is literally just between Max Verstappen and Sergio Perez. And the only two anthems we're going to hear is actually the three anthems we're going to hear. It's going to be a rotation. It's going to be always the Austrian anthem every week because that's Red Bull. And it's going to be between the Dutch anthem and the Mexican anthem. Those are the only two anthems we'll hear at least for at least the first maybe 4 to 5 races. Who knows? Maybe we might hear the Spanish national anthem with Fernando Alonso up there, but who knows? So, yeah.
So when you look at the race as a whole, what do you think are kind of like the things that should kind of stuck with you the most?
I do want to we're talking about Red Bull a lot, so that was my first takeaway, but I'm not going to mention that first. I'm going to talk about the FIA because I got a bit of everyone's going to talk about the FIA. It's a bone that everyone doesn't likes to pick with, but the FIA need to understand and need to learn how to follow the rules properly. They haven't followed. You go back 2021 Abu Dhabi. I'm a Red Bull fan, but I'll admit it though, they didn't follow the rules to the teeth. They didn't. They slightly tilted the rules a little bit. And they did it again this time where they didn't follow them to the teeth because in the rules section, as it says in Article 16.3, as it was posted to Twitter as well, but I did find it as well to confirm, but it says any decision or communication concerning a particular competitor should be given to him within 25 minutes of such decision and receipt must be acknowledged. Therefore, within 25 minutes of that decision of him saying, hey, you actually have a 10-second penalty because you didn't serve your 5-second penalty correctly because there was interference with the jack, that kind of thing like that. We need to let you know so you can push higher. But the fact that they waited until after he did the whole podium, after he celebrated, and they're like, hold on a second, we're actually a 10-second penalty now. You lose the podium. And then now as well, I was reading through Twitter and stuff like that, the whole notification. So apparently it was on Instagram as well. Aston Martin went to the FIA and said, listen, these are all the other times. They brought receipts and they said, these are all the other times that other teams have done this and you haven't penalized them. So why are you penalizing us? And they're like, you know what? That's fair. You got us. We're sorry. Like we messed up again. Who knows? Who would have thought the FIA messing up a ruling? Who would have thought? But that's my first takeaway is the FIA just not following the rules to the teeth and then being inconsistent with the ruling. Because I understand if you want to be consistent with giving out penalties. I mean, Esteban Ocon knows that from last week. He got about 6 of them. He knows about the FIA. They like to give out penalties, but like at least be consistent and be able to make a decision before the end of the race. Because it was an issue last year as well, where a lot of decisions were made post race and where drivers didn't know where they're going to finish because it affects the whole podium position. Like if you go up there thinking you're going to celebrate the podium, you have a great moment and they're like, yep, we're sorry, podium's given away. I mean, it's happened to Max before as well. Max Verstappen, post-race penalties. We've seen this time and time again with the FIA not making decisions effectively during the race because they're busy doing other stuff. They can't make decisions effectively. They need to be people need to be changed there because clearly people who work in those positions can't think critically in those moments. Like that's got to be a point in the job description. Sorry, that's my little rant for the day.
Tell us how you really feel, Sam. My gosh.
Exactly.
Tell us how you really feel.
Yeah. I'm not even an Aston Martin fan, but it's just like it had no effect on me. But I was like, come on, Fernando Alonso, 100th career podium. So yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Just building off of that, and then I'll throw it back to you for another takeaway. But like yourself, I did a little bit of scrolling on Twitter, and I came across a statement that Alonso had made after he was demoted to 4th place. So he says, I was on the podium. I did the pictures. I took the trophy. I celebrate with the champagne. I think it's a poor showing by the FIA. They had 35 laps to apply the penalty. And it kind of circles back to what you had mentioned, that there's a 25-minute, 25-minute kind of period, that you can assess a penalty or make any final decisions that need to be made. And I think, it is a poor showing by the FIA. Like this is, the top racing in the world. And if you're not adhering to the rules that you laid out yourself, like what does that say about not only, your position as the top racing level in the world, but everything else? So I 100% agree with that. I definitely think it is a poor showing. And, going back to what you said about them coming to receipts, like if it has to come to that, I think that kind of tells you everything that you need to know, because it just goes to show that the people that are responsible for addressing these penalties and assessing all the types of penalties that need to be assessed, if they're not holding themselves liable, then I think that's problem A. And it's like you said, like if people gotta lose their job, if new people gotta come in, some new faces, then so be it. Because I think even from an emotional standpoint, like Alonso had mentioned, you're up there, you're celebrating. It's a big moment, and especially for him, 100th career podium.
Mm-hmm.
It definitely is. It definitely is. A big toll on you emotionally as well. So I'm 100% on your side with that. Yeah.
No, for sure. Yeah, I think that's like a huge, yeah, I saw that quote as well that he said is like, especially the mention of the sponsors, like the sponsors, that's a huge moment for them as well.
Yeah.
Like they're pointing to the sponsors, they're like, hey, that's a huge moment. And the fact that that gets taken away or like slightly tarnished away because of like the FIA's incompetence of the fact that they can't do their job right, it's a huge hit onto the sponsors as well as to the team. So Fernando Alonso is right, hitting the nail right on the hammer for sure. So
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Kind of going on to my second takeaway, I want to talk about the Red Bull reliability, I think is still a concern to be talked about because it was mentioned slightly near the end of the race where both Max and Checo were dealing with a number of issues. That was, again, maybe not major issues, but they were, feeling slightly concerned near the end of the race. And, if Fernando Alonso maybe had a bit more pace, was a little more faster, quicker, then for sure they would feel more concerned. But I think realistically, they didn't really have that concern because they were 10, 15 seconds up on him. So I think in that nature, then I don't think that's the case. But I still think that going ahead to the future races, it's going to be something that looked at because obviously with Max Verstappen not finishing qualifying, not being able to set a lap in Q2 because of some reliability issues, it's something to still be concerned about. When we saw early on last year as well, Red Bull fixed the reliability, but then they went out to dominate. So it might be the same case as well this year. I just want to get kind of your thoughts on the Red Bull reliability and if it's an issue, if you think if it's an issue or not.
It's like you said, like very, very minor. I think I would be more concerned if I was Red Bull, if they were winning. Well, if you win a race, you're not too concerned. But if they were winning races by a smaller margin of time, then I'd start being concerned. But like, last week, I think the two of them combined had beat everybody out by like 20 seconds or something crazy like that. And we even mentioned it before we started. Although Checo started in first, like there was really no question about it at any point during the race whether he was going to finish first or not. So I think obviously it is a concern because you to be that standard of that number one team, you obviously want your car to be in top condition. But like I said, if they were winning by like just scraping by some wins or like there were a lot of external factors that kind of played into a part of them winning, then I'd start to be concerned. But they have a week off now, and I think they'll address it. But I wouldn't be too concerned if I was Red Bull. No.
That's fair. That's for sure. Do you have any other? What's another takeaway you have from this weekend? Any post race thoughts?
Yeah. So I think this race here is a really telling tale of just how much potential Aston Martin has. I know we saw it last week, obviously with Alonso, but I think this week too, when you look at Stroll, he had that great move on Sainz to get ahead. I know it's a little ironic because he ended up having to DNF, but while he was still participating in the race, like he had a great showing. Like it looked like he was flying out there. And then obviously Alonso, barring all the complications that happened, like he had a great race. So like what I think about it, or what I'm trying to picture is like, once Aston Martin kind of figures these kinks out, and you don't expect anybody's car to be at the best, top level two races into the season. Usually by the midway point, even 3/4, that's when you really start to dial in, and it's really clean and cut. So I'm really interested to see how Aston Martin responds to this, because clearly the car is more than capable of competing to be a top 3, top 2 team this season. So I'm interested to see just how high the ceiling is for them this year. That's what I took away from it.
No, for sure. I fully agree. I think Aston Martin, if you look at it from like the development standpoint, in terms of like the development of the car, within I'd say maybe 2 to 3 races, maybe they can be challenging Red Bull, but the Red Bull is still right now in this current moment so far ahead in terms of race pace. Qualifying, yes, maybe there might be a slight difference where you go into a race like Monaco, where like qualifying is really important, and like Fernando Alonso gets pole position and then is able to kind of like defend up front, and then maybe they get a win through there because Monaco's a track that it's very hard to overtake. But I think the pure pace of the Red Bull right now is is way ahead of every other car. And I think for Aston Martin, they're right now, his main focus and main target is Mercedes, because Mercedes right now, I think, is the third best team right now. They prove to be a little bit quicker and better than the Ferrari. Ferrari, obviously, strategy played a little bit into it, but I think also I think Ferrari just doesn't have the straight line speed that compared to the Mercedes or the Aston Martin overall speed they have right now. Like, I think Aston Martin and Mercedes are kind of really the number 2 team on the grid, with Red Bull being number 1. Ferrari's kind of 3 and 4, fighting with kind of the midfield team. So I think for them personally, I think, Aston Martin for sure is looking towards, continually be on the podium week in, week out. And, for sure, like I would love to see Lance Stroll up there as well. I'd love to see Lance Stroll, not just Fernando Alonso. I think Lance Stroll has the potential there. He's got a great car. Obviously, it was just unfortunate this week again with the brake failure, what happened there, the DNF. But hopefully that doesn't happen again, and he's able to finish more races within, the top 5 and get massive points for Aston Martin, because he's going to be he's going to play a huge part in the development of the car and the success of the team overall throughout the season, because one driver cannot carry the whole team. Like, we know that for sure. They can try to, but it usually doesn't go out too well. So yeah, for sure. Another thing I want to talk about as well, like I kind of mentioned as well, but I think Mercedes actually have closed the gap a little bit to Aston Martin, personally, in my opinion, because I think, like, after Bahrain, they were still like, it was 5th and 7th, what it was, not really close to them. But I think this week they finished 5th and 6th, I believe. They were much closer. They were much closer in the battle for kind of the second best team on the grid. In my opinion, they were very close to them. Obviously, they weren't able to get past them. Fernando Alonso still was a little bit clear, but I think you can see within that 5-second window of where George Russell was kind of close to pushing with specifically with Fernando Alonso. I'd say they've gotten a lot closer. I think they're kind of slowly starting to make upgrades week in and week out. And I think that, in the next couple of races, we could potentially see them fighting to get more on the podium more often. Obviously, there was a bit of a drama today about it, because George Russell was temporarily on the podium after some help with some others. But I think in the next couple of weeks, we might potentially see them on the podium without any help from, the FIA or from any other outside organization. I'll just say as well, like, they'll be able to beat them purely on the track and not have outside help as well because of other penalties. That's what I'm saying more. Yeah. Is kind of my final third and final takeaway from this race weekend. What about you?
What's a little F1 without some drama, huh?
Oh, exactly.
Can't have one without the other.
For sure. Yeah.
I think I want to address it. We've spoken in the past, and I think everybody's spoken in the past about Ferrari and the issues that they've been having.
Yep.
We could sit here and list out, what is it? The communication? Is it this? Is it that? What I'm now starting to get concerned about is how the drivers are reacting to it, specifically Leclerc. Yep. You heard him on the radio kind of say to Xavi, he's like, you should have told me Hamilton was in the pit and when the safety car was out. So, like I said, we've spoken about it so many times about what the issue is for Ferrari, but now I think we're starting to see a little bit of a different side from the driver's perspective, because if I'm Leclerc, like I'm very, very upset with everything that's going on. Like, this team is much more competitive, is much more capable of, competing than what they're at now. So I'm kind of wondering how, if this season plays out anything similar to how it played out last season for Ferrari, or if it plays out to how these past 2 races have played out for Ferrari. I'm wondering if something's going to start to, shift within the drivers.
Yeah, that's a possibility as well. I think if you're like, Charles Leclerc for sure. I mean, we saw it even last year as well in Monaco, like that strategy mess up that ruined his race. Like, it happens time and after again. So the communication for sure is easy, but I think, like you pointed out a good thing as well, like how are the drivers themselves feeling about this? Because if you're week in and week out continually to be, screwed over by your team, by poor communication within your team members, what's saying that you don't want to be like, at the end of the year, I don't want to be a part of your team anymore, because I can think like you're in Formula One to win championships. That's what you're there for, at least unless you're Yuki Tsunoda, because Yuki Tsunoda mentioned in Drivers 5, he talked about owning an ice cream store. That's his goals, at least for his main goals of being F1. So, but for every other driver, their goal is to be world champion. And Charles Leclerc has the ability. I think he has 100%. The pure talent and the ability to do so. He needs to be in the right environment with the right team to do so. And maybe Mercedes is the right moment, because I'm just saying, like, Mick Schumacher might not be there in terms of the talent and good enough for Mercedes. maybe look, Charles Leclerc makes a transition over to Mercedes. You have Charles Leclerc, you have George Russell after Lewis Hamilton kind of, takes his way on out. Not saying it's going to happen. I'm saying like maybe the next, at the end of the season, who knows what's going to happen, because Lewis Hamilton himself is not very happy. He doesn't feel connected to the car, as he said. He does not feel connected to the car, which I thought was an interesting quote itself. But regardless of the case, I think it's something that we see. Driver morale is a huge thing. Like Lando Norris and McLaren, like how is he feeling down at P19 every weekend, knowing that McLaren is in its 60th anniversary and they're dogging it down in P19, like getting lapped by like Red Bull and like every other team on the grid right now, by like Haas right now. Haas is outperforming them. A couple of years ago, Haas was like 2016. Haas was nothing. McLaren was still. I mean, 2016 McLaren wasn't great. It was 2014 to 20. But that's my point though. Like what I mean? It's just driver morale is a huge thing in Formula One. And I think if the driver is the ability and the skill to do so, I think they're willing to make that move. I mean, Daniel Ricciardo was one of those drivers. He was never afraid to make moves. Some say it was too many moves. Sometimes it was bad costly moves. Fernando Alonso, the same thing. But I think it's knowing when to make the right move and where to make that move. That's the hard thing that you cannot nail. Like it's very hard to know what team will be better in a year's time from now. That's the tricky thing. But I fully agree though, for sure.
Yeah. The final thing I just wanted to point out quickly, I won't go on too long about it, but I do want to give some flowers to Piastri, starting in P8.
Yeah.
The finish is the finish, but let's look at the bright side here. I thought that was great from him in a season where we've kind of spoken about it a little bit. McLaren's not competitive. I think this is something that there's some good to take away from it. So in his first season, I think that was something that should be acknowledged as well.
No, for sure. Alrighty, now it's time for the favorite time. It's time to go back to school. It's time to give this race a grade. What was your grade for this race on a scale of A+ to F, or F to A+? Which way you want to go?
I gave it a B.
Okay.
I like we had mentioned, after that safety car, it was kind of just like, okay, this is just delaying the inevitable. If you're into the drama off the track, then this is right up your alley. This is definitely a higher grade for you. But sure. I don't know, like for me, like it's kind of like relates back to my driver of the day. Like regardless of where Verstappen starts, like I expect him to finish podium.
Yeah.
So the fact that he went from P15 to P2, like don't get me wrong, that's by all means, doesn't matter who you are. That's an incredible feat. But I expected that, to say the least. So I didn't give it like. I didn't give it too much thought, but I'd rank it a B. I wasn't like blown away by it.
Okay. I mean, I kind of gave the same reasons. I gave it a bit of a higher grade I said A-, which maybe a little bit too high, too generous for it. I think very exciting first few laps with a close race action between the top 5 and the midfield. The safety car made the race interesting and added kind of changing strategy of like when people were pitting and getting that kind of free pit stop. Leclerc's and Verstappen's charge up the field was fun to watch, provided some great battles and some nice overtakes. The Red Bull dominance, though, made it a bit boring, I think. Like, after that race, like you mentioned, safety car restart, we talked about it previous as well. There was really no other competition. They're like, most of the battles were happening in the midfield. And I think that's what a lot of people have a problem with F1, is watching it as a series compared to other series, like a NASCAR or a IndyCar, because they're closer to spec series, and the competition is much closer. And I think that's the difference. Is like some people like F1 because they like the engineering ability, the fact that a team can create a car that's so amazing and that's like an engineering masterpiece and that can dominate. And some people like that because like, hey, that team spent a really good amount of time and a good amount of money developing an insane car, and they deserve to be up there because they learned how to develop the car the best. Other people like closer racing. Yep. And sometimes F1 doesn't always give that. The new regulations have given us that in terms of the closer racing, in terms of the finishing, for sure. But I think this year's just an odd case, the first 2 races, because Red Bull is just so dominant. But if you look from downwards, other than Red Bull, it was very close throughout the rest of the field in terms of there was some great battles between, like I believe it was like, Oscar Piastri, Lando Norris, even though it was P15, like obviously there was like George Russell, Carlos Sainz, Lewis Hamilton, like other than like maybe not including the battles of like the fact that Max Verstappen, when he was just overtaking everyone, it was just, like just zooming past everyone, like, it was like F1, like F2 kind of thing like that. It felt like that, but for sure, other than that, it wasn't really there's no fight for the race win. That's the big thing as well. There's no fight for race wins right now. Everyone's just fighting for the midfield. That's all it is. It's for P15, P10, P9, P8, small level points. It's a difference for sure, but they're not fighting for the championship. That's the big thing. And again, FIA, I've already mentioned this well, they kind of once again ruined the race slightly, or tainted the race a little bit. I mean, yeah, you can say you like the drama for sure, but when it has the fact that it has the effect of someone like Fernando Alonso earning his 100th career podium,
yeah,
that's where like people don't like that. If it was another driver potentially on the verge of possibly earning their first podium, then yeah, it's slightly different. Like we saw with Lando Norris back in, I think it was Austria 2020 or 2021. It was like where the Lewis Hamilton was given like a 5-second penalty. It was like down to 3.4, and he got his first podium because it was like down to 4.4. That's where it's a moment of like, okay, wow, like, like that's great, that Lewis Hamilton got a 5-second penalty in that way. But in this way, it's the opposite feeling. So I still give it an A- though. For sure. So yeah, that's what I think about that. But, yeah.
Looking ahead to Australia, what are you feeling? How are you feeling? What are you thinking?
A couple things. I'm interested to see how the 4 DRS zones that they're mentioning are going to be introduced, and kind of how that is going to affect the race, because that's going to have a huge effect on, overtakes for sure. I think overtaking is going to be there's going to be a high number of overtakes throughout the race, which is going to be great. A lot of overtakes, based on car pace for sure. That's going to be the case, which is going to be great to see. Another thing I would say for sure is how the FIA will move forward when it comes to handing out penalties, and if they'll be more, not consistent, but more at least closer to a decision, and they can make a decision more quickly in terms of like, okay, there's a penalty, let's give out a penalty within that time slot because that's what the rule says. And therefore, and I think they've learned their lesson. They saw the drama, the negative impact that it had on this overall race as a federation, as a sport. And I think they'll hopefully learn from there as well. What about you?
Yeah, I think I'm most interested to see how these top level teams how they react to some of the issues they've been having, whether how big or how small they are, whether they're as big as Stroll DNFing or as minor as Red Bull's issues, or as Ferrari's communication issues. Ferrari, I'm not even going to continue saying I'm interested to see because there's nothing to see. But Red Bull and Aston Martin in particular, I'm expecting some fine tuning. I think this is gonna be another showing for Red Bull. Obviously, it's not really that much of a hot take, but this is gonna be another showing for Red Bull, and they're just gonna run away with it. But I think I'm more interested to see how Aston Martin responds after Stroll DNF today. So
yeah. I think the only thing I was going to mention as well, I'm interested to see as well how Mercedes will do kind of in the future in terms of the development, and if they're going to continue to make strong developments for the car to push closer to the front to fight with Aston Martin. And as well, I'm interested to see how the Red Bull does in comparison to kind of, because like last year, Max Verstappen had an issue where he DNF'd in Australia last year. And reliability again kind of being a minor concern for them, so it's going to be something they're going to look at going into Australia in 2 weeks from now, and it's going to be for sure something to be looking for and have on your radar if you are a Red Bull fan and F1 fan as well. But
absolutely.
And I think that will do it for this week's episode of the Debrief. I've been Sam, he's Rob, and we will see you in 2 weeks for the Australian Grand Prix. That's going to be 1 a.m. our time, so it's going to be a late night for sure. Staying up late. But other than that, we will see you in 2 weeks. Peace.